Hi, hey Ashley. It's a little cold here today, so hopefully I have the chat on well. Let's move that out of the way. It's still beautiful out, but I don't know how many more Sundays I'll be able to broadcast from out here on my yoga deck, but it's fabulous today. So, welcome, and for those of you who are joining this in a recorded way, glad to see you as well. I'll set the stage for what we'll be talking about today, and then we'll get right to it. So today is a lot of threes, and so we're going to talk about three different kind of definitions around kindergarten readiness, or what some call school readiness. We're going to talk about three mistakes that people make when they think about and conceptualize school readiness. We're going to talk about three remedies that we want to offer up as solutions to the mistakes. And then there'll be three calls to action. So that's kind of lots of threes to cover in just a few minutes. But we'll go just kind of briefly on each of them, and not too much depth today on any one topic unless people have questions or comments. So again, our three or four threes, I guess, are three definitions of what we mean by readiness, three mistakes that we see that are being made worldwide, three remedies to those mistakes, and then three calls to action so that we can do something about it. So the first thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about what readiness means. And this is very much related to our call to action that we'll end our broadcast with. This idea that we probably all think we know what readiness means, but we all probably have a different sort of operational definition. So if you want, and you're joining us live and you want to comment really quickly what you think a synonym means for readiness, what you mean by readiness, that's great. But I'm going to share a couple three definitions or kind of thoughts around how readiness is conceptualized. And so some fellow early childhood folks that have a podcast called the Child Care Bar and Grill talk about readiness being really, in essence, the kid's birth date, right? Because it's nothing more than, at least for those of us in the United States, it's nothing more than when you turn 5. Then you are ready for kindergarten because you turned 5. So that's one way to think about readiness. Another one comes from David Elkind, and he talks about, and I'll read part of his quote. He said, readiness always refers to the relation between the child and the demands or the expectations that are being made of or imposed upon him or her. So the idea is that one theory is you turn 5, you're ready. Another theory is you kind of ebb and flow with readiness. You can be ready for one thing given the circumstances, the demands, the supports, and then not so ready under other circumstances. My colleagues, some of whom have joined us today, and I have been trying to play around with the definition of readiness. And so I will read part of our emerging definition. But even as I was getting ready for today's broadcast, I was sort of like, there's still something kind of missing. So think a little bit about what you like or what might be missing from the following definition that my colleagues and I have generated. So basically, readiness is a developmental process. And that part I like because I love the emphasis on development, and I love this notion of this process which sort of suggests interaction. It's largely unpredictable and highly influenced by the child's social relationships and interactions. Readiness requires a whole child perspective where individual differences are expected, valued, and celebrated. So there's lots of things I like about it. I'm just not sure it conveys to people who aren't in our field or aren't kind of in tune with the nuances about whole child and Vygotsky stuff on, social, cultural relationships and so forth, if it really conveys what we mean. So we'll come back to what does it mean to turn 5? What does it mean to be ready but not ready? And what does it mean to really look at this from a developmental process? So I mentioned that my colleagues from, and I had been working on this definition, and there are 7 of them, actually, from all over the globe, representing, of course, the United States, Jamaica, Finland, Guatemala, China, South Korea, New Zealand, and Turkey. I don't think I missed one. Did I say Guatemala? So we kind of got together and said, okay, what is it that's going on this planet Earth around readiness? And we really found that there was this underlying issue around definitions, mistakes, and that we needed to come up with remedies. So those are our big three things today, is trying to define what is readiness. Is it a theory that you turn 5? That's it. Is it that it changes and comes and goes in terms of I'm ready but I'm not ready? Is it a developmental process that really is inter and intra-dependent upon other things? So we identified 3 mistakes, and all of these mistakes and remedies are going to be talked about in a forthcoming paper that was accepted in the Division for Early Childhood's Young Exceptional Children journal, and we have a Voices from the Field article coming out in the spring of 2016 where these colleagues and I from all over the globe revisit these mistakes and remedies. So I'll mention the 3 mistakes quickly. I'll mention the 3 remedies quickly because they're kind of big, like how in 15 minutes can we solve what many of us battle on a day-to-day basis around readiness. And then we'll shift gears into a quick call to action. And in that call to action, you will have a chance to sort of say, what is it that you're thinking about? What are the challenges that you see in terms of kindergarten or school readiness? And I was thinking about readiness a little bit too, in the sense that even from transitioning from early intervention or early childhood intervention or whatever people might call birth to 3, there's sort of this idea of readiness. Are you ready for preschool now? So it's like this whole top down. Are you ready for college? Are you ready for high school? Are you ready for middle school? Are you ready for elementary? Are you ready for preschool? Are you ready? It's like, so we've got to get a handle on what this all means. So the 3 mistakes include conceptualizing readiness as a trait, and this goes back to David Elkin's work. The second one is conceptualizing or targeting outcomes that are around readiness that are really fragmented and isolated in terms of how we teach them. And then the third mistake is really thinking about readiness in a very standardized way. And this isn't just about standardized testing. This is around policies, practices, teaching that is really emphasizing a standardized approach. So that's this trait, this fragmentation, and this notion of standardization. So on the flip side, there are 3 readiness remedies. And I was really glad that we had written those because I'm all too aware that it's easy to be a critic and it's not as easy to find solutions. Ashley and I have been struggling with that this week. You'll see in Tuesday's blog when we talk a little bit about using publicly displayed behavior charts. It's easy to kind of criticize, and I think as fellow teachers, we feel a lot of criticism from society, from administrators, from boards, from taxpayers, from children, from our students that might be undergrads and causing us fits. But this idea to be a critic is not so hard, but to come up with solutions is rather hard. And then I was reading a book on broadcasting happiness, and I thought, I'm broadcasting, and her point was we're all broadcasting, whether it's a smile or a frown that we give, it's how we greet someone, it's what we say on our Periscope broadcast, it's what we write about in our Facebook or our Twitter posts, but are we conveying or broadcasting happiness, or are we really sort of just more of the same and admiring the problem? So when we, my colleagues and I from around the globe looked at readiness solutions or remedies, we've said 3 things. So instead of looking at readiness as a trait, let's look at in the sense of relationships. It's getting windy here, so my stuff is falling over. So the remedy to looking at readiness as a trait is to look at readiness as a relationship. The second remedy is to really look at the integrated whole. So instead of looking at the child in isolation of their family, isolation of their community, or even isolation of their body, right? It's like, I need to rhyme, but how does rhyming relate to my fine motor skills? And how does rhyming relate to my self-regulation? And how does rhyming relate to my working memory? So we need to have this integrated whole versus this fragmented or disintegrated kind of approach. So the remedy is to really look at children as an integrated whole. And then third, if our policies and practices currently focus on standardization, what can we do to really start promoting this expectation that people are and will be different, and then not only expect it, but to value it, that we really want to promote what is different among us versus trying to make us all the same. So we had 3 opening kind of definitions or ideas around readiness. The first was that it's sort of, in theory, you turned 5, end of story. Next, from David Elkin, we talked a little bit about how, depending on the demands of the situation, the expectations, your readiness ebbs and flows. And then my colleagues and I have been really thinking this as a developmental process, this way of looking at the child as an integrated whole and really celebrating our differences. So then we identified 3 mistakes that we see being made worldwide, as well as 3 remedies. So it's trait versus relationship, disintegration or fragmentation versus integrated whole, and then standardization versus an expectation and a valuing of differences. So that sets the stage. But as I was listening to the podcast from the Child Care Bar and Grill folks, they really were talking a lot about advocacy and how we can make a change in terms of how we deal with readiness. And they really made a point to say that before we're ready to engage in advocacy work or reshaping policy or even rewriting policy, we need to do inner work. And of course, anything hard always starts off with inner work, right? So the inner work is, do you have a definition of readiness? Do you have a clear definition? And to be honest, I don't know that I can say yes to that. I kind of know what it isn't. I know what I bristle at. I know what I don't like about it. You may have seen the image that I've been using to promote this week's broadcast, and it was a picture I took when I was with Jennifer in Fort Worth, and it was in a grocery store. And there were these bananas, in their different sections on the shelf. And there were signs above them saying, okay, this chunk of bananas are ready now. These will be ready in a few days. These will be ready in 3 to 4 days. And I was just like, oh, how funny that we're trying to even predict when a banana will ripen. It's sort of like, don't you just buy it and open it and you figure out what you get and then you decide what you're going to make based on how ready that banana was, right? So it's this idea that we think we know what's ready. We think we can define it. We think we can measure it. We think we can attain it. But can we really? So your first call to action this kind of week or this process is to think about, how do you define readiness? Do you say, yep, you turned 5. I'm done. That's my definition. Do you really buy into that it depends, right? It depends on what the question is. Ready for what? Or do you see this as a developmental process where we have to really embed those 3 remedies that I talked about in terms of relationships and integrated wholeness and an emphasis on diversity and creativity? So as you're thinking about your own definition, I'm going to give you 3 more things to think about because we're doing 3 things today. If you'd like at any point too, you can comment and say, what state you're from or listening to this broadcast from, and how warm or how cold it is where you are. So like, I'm Christy and I'm in Ohio, and I think the real feel is about 40, though my nose keeps running, so I think it's even colder. So if you want to just kind of comment and let folks know who had joined us from which states or which countries, that would be great. You can also get ready to give some hearts just by tapping your screen. So as I say to you, what do you think readiness is? Do you think readiness is just about being 5? Then you can just tap on your screen and give some hearts and say, yeah, that's sufficient. We don't need to go any further. Some of you might be typing where you're from and what the degrees are where you are. Or you can give some hearts to something that says, well, I'm kind of with David Elkin. I kind of think this is like, it's not a trait, and it's something that moves and shifts and changes depending on the expectations and depending on ready for what. And then lastly, did you sort of resonate with my colleagues and my definition around this whole remedy, where we have to look at it as a developmental process that's very about the integrated whole, that is really expecting and valuing diversity. So at any point, as I give you the last 3 things to think about today, feel free to comment and say where you're from. Hopefully I didn't turn the comment section off today or give hearts. Let's see if I know how to allow that. I don't. I might not be showing the chat, so I might have hidden it from view, but hopefully that's working for you all now if you want to be able to comment where you're from and what the temperature is, because it would just be interesting to see, and or give some hearts to things that are around what you believe defines readiness. So here's our last few things about helping you define readiness. So that's your first call to action this week, is to get a really good definition going before you try to do anything harder or stronger. Okay, so the first thing to help you think about what readiness means or how to define it is to really think about that ultimately readiness is defined by a child's experiences and interactions. So if this interaction and these experiences are really critical, somewhere in our definition we need to acknowledge this interplay, if you will. So as you're defining it, really keep in mind that experience and interactions will ultimately define who is ready, how ready they are, and what they're ready for. The second thing is just really knowing that development is a process, fine, but development is complicated. And so if we don't really recognize that development is influenced and impacted by a whole host of variables, we'll always oversimplify. We'll always try to fragment or isolate things versus really saying, this is all interrelated. These are all interdependent. So we really want to think about readiness and early development as really complex. It can't be simply stated, can't be simply measured, can't be simply defined probably, right? Okay, so your third thing to kind of help you think about your own definition is to really accept the value of diversity. And this, for many of us, is not going to be hard. But for many of our colleagues and members of our community, this sort of idea that we're all different, that some of us are ready to start school when we're 5 and some of us aren't. But we all get to go to school. So what does that mean? And if we try to really do these group starts and group stops all day with too many kids in small spaces, somebody's going to act out. Somebody should act out, right? So this idea that if we can accept, embrace, value this diversity, we can stop trying to make everybody ready by a certain date or by a certain grade, and that we can stop fearing what's to come. So again, back to the colleagues at the Child Care Bar and Grill, I use an analogy that's always like, how do you get ready to be dead? But they had a better analogy. So I'll end with this and give you your final calls to action. So she talks about how someday some of us might end up in assisted care, maybe a nursing home, maybe in our own homes, but we're going to kind of age and we're going to need more care than we've needed at the midpoint or earlier in our lives. And so she said, what would it look like for a bunch of 3-year-olds to get ready to be in a nursing care facility or assisted living? Should we teach them to learn to walk with walkers? Because someday you're going to need to walk with walkers because your legs aren't going to work as well anymore. You're going to fall and break your hip and you're going to need to learn to walk with a walker. So let's work on now readying you for needing assisted care when you're in your 80s or 90s. And that was really compelling to me. It's like, of course not. Why would we worry about what I'm going to be doing down the road? A million things could happen. I might not even make it to 80. Same thing. Why am I worrying about what you're doing at 3 because of what you might need to do in the 3rd grade? Why am I worrying about what you're doing at 3 months because of what you're doing at 3 years? So that's my little stint on kindergarten or school readiness. Your 3 calls to action, just to wrap up our weekly broadcast and our 3s. Definitely work on the inner work. What is your own definition of readiness? Is it clear? Is it concise? Is it understandable? Next, start talking to others. What is their definition? Can you come up with a joint definition, especially in your district or in your local community? Can you have a common definition? And some of my colleagues in Michigan have been working really hard to this end. And then lastly, we're finally ready to advocate. We're finally ready to let school boards know, local officials know, state policymakers know that we're early childhood experts. We're here to help. We're here to be of service. And so if they have questions around readiness, we're here to answer those. So those are your 3 calls to action. Do your inner work so that you know what readiness means and you are clear about it. Then talk to others. Make sure that you have a common definition of readiness. And then be ready to advocate. Be ready to reach out to others and say, hey, I'm here. I'm not just a critic. I'm here to provide solutions. So thank you again for joining me on this kind of brisk Sunday in October. And if you have any questions or comments, you know how to reach me on social media. You can also always use hashtag B2KCoach, and you can follow some of the key points that were made today. So as always, I'll stay around for another 30 seconds or so in case there's a question. Otherwise, great to have you all, and we'll see you next week.